Welcome to Modular Games. My name's Kyle. As promised, this is the first episode of our series where we rewrite the character classes for this game. And before we get going on that, there is a little bit of housekeeping to take care of, and that is we are talking about the divine spellcasting classes. And as everyone who plays D&D knows, those characters are expected to fill the role of healer in a party. And because we are addressing these classes, we may as well address the elephant in the room, which is the fact that healing in D&D is kind of weird. And while I could say a lot of things about that, non-magical healing is not, well, medical healing is not really supported in the game. If someone is going to take the role of a healer, they pretty much are required to be a divine caster at this point. However, if you give a small buff to mundane medical healing, this changes a great deal. The option that I have come up with in order to address this is that when a character with the medicine skill attempts to treat an injured character and rolls a 15 or higher on their medicine check, then the injured character is now allowed to spend hit dice as though during a short rest in order to recover health. However, the injured character has the option to, instead of adding their own constitution modifier on the rolls to recover health, they can instead use the wisdom modifier of the character who is treating them with medicine. In this way, if that character happens to have a very high wisdom, then you might heal even better than you would during a normal short rest. Now, some people might notice that this really causes problems for a certain feat, the Healing Hands feat. An alternative option is that you give the Healing Hands feat to everyone for free, that benefit where you can heal someone for 1d6, but they can't benefit from that thing again for a certain period of time, and then someone who actually takes the Healing Hands feat gets the benefit that I just described, where people are now allowed to spend hit dice in order to heal when you use the medicine skill on them. This seems like a very good compromise, and I think a lot of parties would be happy with that change. So that's the first point of bookkeeping or housekeeping that we need to take care of. The second piece of housekeeping is that I promised a unified divine progression for divine spellcasting characters that is different from arcane spellcasting. Now, I knew that there were generally two options that I could go with, and I wanted to use the first option, which is a mirror of what warlocks use, because warlocks are very unique compared to other spellcasters, and I wanted that general effect for divine characters. But I had a lot of trouble figuring out how this is going to work, because the spellcasting for warlocks above level 10 gets a little bit weird, and so there was a second option. I'll bring up a couple of tables on here, and we're going to go ahead and look at the second option first, and that is Unified Divine in Progression number 2. Very simply, you progress exactly the same way as Arcane Spellcasters, except that you only have one spell slot per spell level. This is, of course, very simple, but it's not very flavorful, and it's not really satisfying. You're going to rely on some kind of other features in order to fill in that power gap. And even though the math works out really well in order to apply this as a stacking type of progression with arcane casting, it's just not very satisfying. Let me go ahead and pull up real quick the table for how this stacks. And you can see in red you have the arcane casting, you have a level 5 arcane caster, level 15 divine caster, and then the blue is all the divine stuff. So you're going to fill in the red first, and it doesn't progress any after you go into the divine levels. And then you have the higher level slots are all just one spell slot each. It doesn't really matter what order you take the character levels in. You're going to stack it up in this manner. And of course you get the side benefits of channel divinity or whatever other divine spellcasting features to fill in the power gap of not having as many spell slots. I wasn't really convinced that this feels satisfying. It seemed like it was something that I wouldn't be terribly excited about myself, and so I tried and I tried, and I eventually figured out how to make the Warlock casting to fit. Before I show you the tables on that, let's look for a quick second, what are the motivations of a deity in a D&D setting? The deities want their priests or their clerics to be a representation of their divine power in the world. But they don't necessarily have a motivation for those characters to be the most powerful beings in the world. They don't want their clerics to become deities most of the time, according to books written about D&D lore. The deities seem to be fairly unfriendly to level 20 and higher characters. So they don't want to give a million spell slots out, but they do want their priests to be a representation of their divine power all the time. And so getting their spell slots back on a short rest kind of makes sense. They never really run out of divine power, even though they don't have as much raw power as the Arcane Casters, which it turns out that's exactly what we end up seeing from the Warlock progression. So let's go ahead and take a look at those tables. And you can see you have the exact same tables as you would see for the Warlock progression. And it is you getting maximum spell level, caps out at 5. You don't get your third spell slot until level 11, and you get a fourth one at level 17. However, you probably also notice that there are 2 more columns. There is a miracle level and a number of miracles. The miracle level starts at 1, but you don't get any miracles until level 2, because that's when you start getting miracles. And then you get a second miracle at level 6, and a third miracle at level 13. Meanwhile, the maximum miracle level exactly mirrors what you would expect for the maximum spell level on an Arcane Caster. You get your level 9 miracles at level 17, exactly the way you would want to get a level 9 spell at level 17. If we scroll down a little bit here, we can see the arcane progression in this table in red. And this table, we have a slightly different version of the divine casting table in blue. Here we have more details and side by side. Looking at this table, you can clearly see that starting at level 2, you have roughly the same number. At level 2, you have roughly the same number of spells as the Arcane Caster, but you're getting 2 of them back on a short rest basis, which means that you have more spells. Now at level 3, you actually have 3 third level spell effects, whereas the Arcane Casters only have 2 third level spell effects. Now, because miracles have certain stipulations and requirements that spells don't have, this ends up being okay. Especially given that the Arcane Casters have those low-level slots to fill in the gap. Once we come down and look at higher-level slots, you can end up seeing that you have 4 fifth-level slots at level 20, as opposed to the 3 that are granted to Arcane Casters, but they also have first, second, third, and fourth-level slots to make up the difference. You won't have any 6th level slots, even though Arcane Casters do, and while Arcane Casters have 2 7th, 1 8th, and 1 9th, the Divine Casters are just going to have 1 1 and 1, but these are not normal spells. These are miracles. They have special benefits and special drawbacks that are going to be very different depending on which divine spellcasting class you chose. If you have a cleric, those miracles are going to follow different rules compared to a druid's miracles or a warlock's miracles. Now, let's go ahead and take a quick look at multiclassing. Now, if you have 15 cleric levels and 5 arcane levels, you're really not getting a lot of benefit from those arcane levels. You actually get a kind of downgrade because, you're going to get your 9th level slot, but you're not going to get the special features from having that slot as a miracle. You could consider this to be an upgrade because you do have your 6th level slots back, but your divine miracles are capped out at 8, even though you have 9th level slots for your arcane spells, which are upcasting a 3rd level arcane spell up to 9th level is not quite as good as a 9th level spell. But next we are going to have level 5 Divine and level 15 Arcane. You can see that this plays out very predictably as well. Your divine spell slots are not going to progress past the level of the divine spellcasting class, but you are going to start getting arcane slots at the higher levels to fill in those higher spaces. So it's a very predictable stacking where the divine slots fill in the lower levels on the table, and the arcane slots always fill up the higher levels on the table, regardless of what character class you happen to be at right now. This ends up being, even though it's a manual stacking procedure for multi-classing, it is very, very, very easy to figure out how it works. And that is what I was going for with the unified divine spellcasting progression. Now, let's move on to the cleric class itself. Coming up on here, we have the cleric, unified divine progression. As we just described, you have the spell casting progression that was just shown, but we are going to have Channel Divine Power, which is an alternative version of Channel Divinity, and we are going to have Divine Intervention, which is our Miracles ability. We move that from level 10 to level 2 and change how it works. It is dramatically different. First up, Channel Divine Power is now on a long rest basis because we don't want it to get confused with our spells. And we're going to have several more options. Rather than just having Turn Undead, you're going to gain 2 options at level 1. You're going to have an option called Divine Guidance, which is very similar to the Augury spell. And you are going to have your choice of the following options. You can choose Orisons, which gives you more cantrips. You can choose Rebuke Divine Foe, which is a lot like which is actually exactly like Turn Undead, except that it works on creatures of any creature type. You only get to choose one target as opposed to all targets in range. You can take Turn Undead exactly as written, only available from some deities, or you can actually raise some undead minions, similar to the Animate Dead spell, though you're going to be capped out on a number of minions equal to your proficiency bonus. So at level 5, you could have 3 zombies following you around, which is a lot of fun, but it's going to make people nervous, and it's not as powerful as you might want it to be. I'll focus in a little bit on Divine Guidance, though, because the Augury spell, generally people don't like using the Augury spell because there's a lot of uncertainty involved, especially on the part of the Game Master, because Augury is asking, if I try to do this, will I be successful? They're asking the Game Master to predict the future, and because they often don't want to make that prediction because they're not sure whether that'll be successful or not, they just give an answer of nothing. And that's very unsatisfying for the player, and it's often unsatisfying for the Game Master as well. But Divine Guidance is a lot easier than that. Instead of asking, will this succeed, you're asking your deity, do you want me to do this? Do you want me to try and do this? Generally speaking, your deity wants you to be successful. I mean, you are their representative to the world after all. But on occasion, they will ask you to do things that they're not sure whether you'll succeed or not. They really want you to go get that divine artifact. They really want you to stop this incursion of enemies against their faithful followers. And so even if it puts your life at risk, that deity might ask you to do it anyways. The 4 options are, yes, I want you to do that, or I would very much like you not to do that for number 2. Number 3 is, I would be both pleased and displeased with you for doing that, or number 4 is, I don't care. There is no I don't know answer, but there is an I don't care whether you do that answer. Do you want me to wear a blue shirt or a green shirt? I don't care. Don't ask your deity that question. All right, on to the main event. We have Divine Intervention. Now, this ability is absolutely bonkers. It is like having the Wish spell attached to a contingency spell effect. Yes, I am going to have a contingent wish where at some future time I am going to get my wish granted when certain conditions are met. This is very, very powerful. But there are restrictions in place that make the ability fair. First restriction, obviously, you're not allowed to get a spell effect any more powerful than your Divine Miracle level. So at level 2, when you first get this power, you're not getting any miracles or any wishes stronger than a first level spell. Even at maximum level, you're not getting anything above a 9th level spell. In level 5, it won't be stronger than a fireball. Maybe you ask for your enemies to be wiped out. Well, are there any cleric spells that deal that much damage? So that's what's going to be determining the level of power you can get from your request. Now, the contingency effect. when you make a request of your god, you may declare circumstances under which you want this request to be granted. These circumstances cannot be any more complicated than a description of 3 sentences, and if these circumstances are too ambiguous, then your deity might just not grant that request at all because they're not sure when you wanted it to occur, just like a normal contingency spell. The last restriction is, just like the divine intervention effect that exists in the current iteration of the game, you have to roll percentile dice in order to see whether this is actually going to occur. However, you have much better chances. You need to roll a value that is equal to 50% plus double your cleric level. So at level 2, when you first gain divine intervention, you need to roll 54 or less. At level 20, you need to roll 90 or less. And, of course, if you succeed on this roll, you get the miracle that you asked for, under the conditions that you asked for. But if you fail on this roll, that's when things really get interesting, because your deity just said no. They heard your prayer, and they said, no, I'm not going to answer that. Well, your use of the ability has not been wasted. You can try again. You can ask for something else, but you have to ask for a different spell effect. If you have had a no answer, you cannot ask for that spell effect a second time until you have completed a long rest. So, example for you. I want you to resurrect me from the dead. I want you to cast Raise Dead on me when I die today. Okay, your deity says no. I want you to cast Cure Wounds on me when I drop to 0 health. Yes, I'll do that. You can see how these requests are very similar, but you kind of have to finagle what you're asking for when you fail that percentile roll. Now, an additional balancing measure on this. If you have an active miracle, that is an active request that your deity said yes to, you cannot make another request of the same spell slot level while that request is active. So if you've requested a fireball spell, that's a 3rd level slot. You can't ask for any more 3rd level spells. But if you have access to 5th level spells, you can still ask for that. And of course, you haven't asked for any 1st level spells, so you can ask for one of those. But you cannot have 2 active miracles of the same spell level. The reason why this balancing lever exists is for upper level play. You don't want to have 3 miracles that are all 9th level spell effects. And so you can get a 9th, 8th, and 7th level spell effects, but that's going to take up all of your miracles. Also, haven't quite covered it yet, at certain levels, at 6th level you get improved divine intervention. That means you get 2 requests before you complete a long rest. And at level 13 you get 3 requests before you complete a long rest, just as you might have remembered from the table from Unified Divine Progression, your number of miracles per day. That is the meat and potatoes of how the cleric is going to work. And it ends up feeling really cool because you get a small number of spells that you can use, and then you have to rest, and you get to use them again and again and again. But at the same time, you have these contingent, these pending, very powerful spell effects, and you don't know whether the conditions for those spell effects are actually going to be satisfied today. And so those powerful spell effects could be wasted because your contingency just wasn't satisfied. Those conditions never got met today. You didn't need that spell. And so the effect is wasted, and you have to come up with different conditions tomorrow. You have to come up with a different request for your deity tomorrow. And so you're always asking for things, and you might not actually need the thing that you asked for, and so it never happens. And this has an interplay with your deity that is very, very fun and satisfying, and even though it allows you to have a higher level of overt power, the chance that those spell effects just won't happen means that you don't end up being stronger than your arcane counterparts. Depending on how good your foresight is, you might be a lot weaker than them, or on par with them. And let's be serious about this. Getting those spell effects without spending an action at the time that they occur, that feels really cool. Meanwhile, the percentile chance that the spell is just going to fail means that you generally won't want to use these effects in combat. You'll always want to use them in advance and set them up in advance. Now, let's take a look at a couple of ribbon features. There's 3 ribbon features here, and these don't really have to do with your status with your deity. It's much more having to do with your status as a member of the clergy. The first one, which I believe comes into effect at level 10, is Living Icon. You no longer need a holy symbol. You do not need to use a holy symbol to cast divine spells because you are a holy symbol. You are a living, breathing symbol of your faith. And that means that not only do you not need a holy symbol, but some other cleric of your deity can use you as their holy symbol when they're casting a divine spell. This is absolutely fantastic for role-playing, but mechanically it's basically useless. It's a very satisfying feature for the lore of the game. Now, next we're going to have Prayer Ear and Improved Prayer Ear. Prayer Ear you get relatively early, and you know when someone is praying about you or for your benefit, for your downfall, and so on. Total ribbon feature. The upgrade, Improved Prayer Ear, I don't know whether to grant this at level 18 or level 20, but it is absolutely the capstone feature for the cleric class. And what it says is that whenever a creature who worships your deity prays for something, and that creature that's praying is within 10 miles of you, you get to hear that prayer. You know what they're praying for, and you can choose to grant their prayer. You can expend a divine spell slot. Those are those spell slots that come back on a short rest. You can expend one of those spell slots to have a cleric spell of your choice, which you did not prepare in advance, be cast from the creature's location, from the praying creature's location. If they're asking for their good old mom to be healed of some sickness, you can grant that prayer. If they're asking for the downfall of their enemies, maybe you're not able to do that because they're not standing in the presence of their enemies. But if they're actually, in a life or death struggle and they decide to pray, you can, cast some death effect against their enemy and grant their prayer. Or you can just say no. And if you just say no to someone who is praying to your deity, not only do you have the option to not give them access to one of those spells, to not grant them this miracle, but you can actually answer their prayer by saying, not only am I going to not grant your prayer, but I'm going to punish you for asking for something so outrageous. You can cast blindness on a follower of your faith because they asked for something that is contrary to the will of your deity. And if there was ever a class feature that is more flavorful for a cleric, for a representative of divine power, I don't know of any other feature that is a better representation than this one, because it really lets you play God. It really lets you fill that role to be a representative of your deity. And that's the class. That is the cleric class. You get spellcasting on short rests. You get to answer people's prayers. You get to have your prayers answered. You get to channel divine power. You get to be the ultimate representative of your deity, your patron, on the material plane. Now, I hope that you have enjoyed looking through this, and I hope that some of you try out this version of the cleric. Please give it a try. Tell me how it goes. Leave it in the comments below. Leave a comment before you even do that, telling me whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, what you think of all these changes. I'd also love it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel and all of those things, like the video and all that. But really, this is a revolutionary change to the cleric class and divine casters in general. So tell me how I've done. Tell me what you think. I think it's wonderful, but I know some of you are going to disagree. So let me know how that goes. I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.